for the Agile community. www.Agile.FM. I'm here today with Dave West, product owner at Scrum.org and almost a regular already on Agile.FM. I think this is the second time I have the chance here to speak with Dave, and this is a very important and timely kind of conversation because this is all about the new Scrum Guide release, which happened on the 7th of November 2017. Dave, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Joe. Thanks for inviting me back. I'm glad I didn't offend too many people last time, so you asked me back.
I don't know about that, but Dave, you have a Twitter handle, which is something I just want to spell out for everybody. This is not Dave West, as you would assume. It's David J. West. You're squeezing in your initial just to make it a little bit more difficult for people to find you on Twitter.
Yes, Joe. There was this basketball player called Dave West that apparently has like 2-point-something million followers or something. So I was forced out. But when he gets thrown out of the NBA, I'm taking that handle back. Yes.
Awesome, right? But very similar in numbers is people who have actually watched you actually yesterday with the two creators of Scrum, Ken and Jeff, Ken Schwaber, Jeff Sullivan. And today is a little bit of we're switching roles because yesterday you had a chance to, I think it was like a video recording you guys did about the Scrum Guide release. And today you're the product owner, the single authority. So I want to talk to you about the latest version of the Scrum Guide.
Yes, being the product owner isn't necessarily it's an interesting experience with Ken and Jeff. Obviously, they're very strongly opinionated stakeholders, and interestingly, the Scrum Guide is actually and continues to be owned by Ken and Jeff. I just sort of facilitate the process and update the website and things like that. Jeff and Ken definitely are the owners of the Scrum Guide, but they do listen to lots of people, and that's what drove the recent release on November the 7th, the update.
Yeah. So, Dave, you're the product owner at Scrum.org, and the website, we're going to find the guide in the English version and probably in translated versions already, is scrumguides.org. Now, what I have to say, and it's actually something I didn't even notice so far, maybe I haven't looked at this document too carefully in this regard, it is pretty cool, is there is really no version. I mean, behind the scenes, there is probably a version of the Scrum Guide, but there's just a November 2017 release. So there's really no, which I think is pretty cool if you think about it. There's not a team out there that says, I'm going to do Scrum 1.2 and another team is doing Scrum 1.3. It's just the Scrum Guide. It's one document.
Exactly. And that's actually really important. There is one definition of Scrum. And even though Scrum's 22 years old, the essence of Scrum really hasn't changed. What has changed, though, is the way it's described. Because, Scrum is very simple. The Scrum Guide, it was 16 pages. It's now almost 19. I think it's 18. The only changes really have been clarity. And that clarity, or those improvements of understanding, better definitions, descriptions, etc., have really been driven by the community, by the points that they raised. And you'll see the changes in the Scrum Guide in this release have really just tightened up certain things and made things a little bit clearer because 22 years, the world is a very different place. And what people are thinking about, what's top of mind, is very, very different now than when it was when Scrum was initially created by Ken and Jeff in response to actually their needs of delivering fabulous products.
Right. So what we're discussing here are the changes that happened from the previous version to the new version, which was released on the 7th of November. And I want to just jump in. One number that was shared by, I think it was you actually, statistically, is that there are roughly 12 to 15 million daily scrums going on around the world. I mean, that's a scary number if you think about that. So there's a lot of standing up going on in this world or sitting down, right? Now, the daily scrum, as many as we have here, there's also a problem with this meeting out there. So there's some of the changes actually happen around the daily scrum.
Yeah.
So it's very popular and it's done very frequently, but it's done very, I would say, poorly. And what are the changes around the the daily Scrum and why is the daily Scrum in the focus here?
It's interesting that you raise the daily Scrum, and you're right about between 12 and 15 million people are doing, Scrum every day. A lot of them are calling it a stand-up, Joe, which which really, I don't have anything against them calling it a stand-up, but obviously I encourage people to call it a daily Scrum for two reasons. One, because there's some people in this world that can't stand up, and we don't want to sort of make it divisive for them. But secondly, really the idea of a Scrum, everybody coming together every day and sort of like, deciding how to best to move the game on or move the sprint on is very, very important to have that top of mind. And Scrum, the phrase Scrum was actually coined in the new product game. And the new product game, the reason why they described it as a Scrum was this idea that when the ball stops moving in rugby, when it stops making progress, as it were, when because it gets stuck, maybe it gets stuck under a semi-conscious player or something, which is always the case when I played rugby, Joe. And that player gets carted off, and then they sort of dig the ball out. They go, oh, who was making? Oh, well, the ball was with this side, but it sort of stopped. So the idea is that you come together as a Scrum, the ball's put in, and the game starts again. And that's very much what a daily Scrum is now. But unfortunately, and you're right highlighting, Joe, that the changes or one change around the daily Scrum, a lot of people think of it as a status meeting. In fact, the three questions, what did I do yesterday? What am I doing today? And what's stopping me? Have been interpreted incorrectly to be about status. So it's about me reporting status to, he used to be my manager, now he's called a Scrum Master, or she's called a Scrum Master.
Right.
And so it's not. That is not what it is. It's not a status meeting. What it is literally a daily Scrum. The ball may have stopped moving adequately, and we've come together, pushing and shoving as a team, and gone, how do we move the ball forward again? How do we make progress towards that sprint goal to deliver the value that we're trying to deliver, the learning we're trying to deliver? So the daily Scrum, what they've done is, the emphasis of the three questions has been reduced, and it's more focused on that as one technique. Other people walk the board, see where the ball is, as it were. Some people use other techniques. There's certain tools that help. But ultimately, the change in this release of the Scrum Guide has been very much to remind people of that. Remember, it's not a status meeting.
Right, and it's all about inspection and adaptation, right? And so the meeting stayed 15 minutes. The questions have been de-emphasized. I think that's what
exactly it.
There's nothing wrong if the people are still answering those questions, but the purpose of the meeting is really about inspecting and seeing where they are in the current sprint. I love this, right? Something I was fighting myself, teams all the time to not go into the status mode in this meeting, and basically even worse, reporting to somebody, right, or having the feeling of reporting to somebody.
And it's very easy to fall back into this old practice, and obviously, no document, changing a document will change that, ability for you to fall back. But hopefully, most of your listeners reread the Scrum Guide occasionally, just to sort of remind them of the ideas. It's as a very short document, you can read it very quickly, and that the benefit of doing that is that when by reading this, you're reminded of the fact that it's a daily Scrum. It's not a status report meeting. It's funny though, Joe, you mentioned 15 minutes, and that brings another change that this is a really sensitive change, because Ken Schwaber was like, well, why do we even have to say this? Surely people can work this out themselves. But a lot of people think of a time box not in terms of this being the maximum time possible, but they think of it as literally you have to take, in the case of the daily Scrum, 15 minutes. You do not have to take 15 minutes. It can be over in 5 minutes. It can be. It's important that you all come together. That event is an important thing to make sure that we're making progress and we're moving forward. But if you stand there and you go or sit and say, oh, how's it going? Oh, I need some help in this, and it's over in 2 minutes. That's okay.
Yeah.
As long as you're getting to the outcomes that you require, as long as the team's making progress as long as the team's inspecting and adapting, based on the new knowledge that another day has actually provided. But it doesn't have to take that. So we've cleared up that confusion in the time box and said it's a maximum length. Of course, Ken did say that if you just Googled it, you would find that out. But we appreciate the feedback on the user voice, helping us understand.
Right. Well, it is. Maybe we're doing this too much, and we assumed that people would know. But definitely good to know. But on the other side, it's also interesting that you just gave a shorter completion time of a daily Scrum. What is really fascinating every time I see or meet with Ken, and yesterday on the camera, right, when you see him, it does always something to me in form of rethinking things we're doing out there with projects. So, for example, in the daily Scrum companies I have worked with in the past, or teams I've seen, their emphasis or their process efficiency is measured of how fast you can do these meetings, and it's really not about that either, right? So you have these 15 minutes. You have the 15 minutes for your daily Scrum. Use them wisely. If you finish earlier, great, but it's not the goal to finish this thing in 5 minutes and say, like, we're really good at Scrum. We have very short meetings. And Ken, when I see him, he has this aura around him, right? When you feel like you look at this and it's like it really gives a substantial amount of depth to the conversation, which I think is needed sometimes in the daily Scrum as well.
Yeah, and that is an important point. We're not saying that you should whiz through things. We're not saying that you should not, as you described, if you're really good at Scrum, everything goes really quickly. Actually, the opposite. The reality is that take the amount of time that you need. The time box, though, is a mechanism to keep you focused, you focused on the outcome. And Ken said something yesterday, which I think it was tweeted, but it was basically said, Scrum, it requires intelligence. You can't practice Scrum as a stupid person. So be intelligent about your use of things like time boxes, your use of the daily Scrum, and use it. But remember what the intent is. Remember what you're trying to achieve. And you're smart. I mean, the world is full of smart people. You wouldn't be in the jobs that you're in unless you were smart and able. So be smart. Don't leave your brain at home. It's like. That drives Ken. You talk about him being, very thoughtful, and every time you spend time with him, you realize just how you've not been thoughtful enough. But Ken, what frustrates him the most is when people are like, well, that's what it says in the Scrum Guide. He goes, if I told you to jump off a cliff, would you? And, I wonder how many people would say yes. We didn't have that in the Scrum Guide, just in case. That's not like some sort of thing written down, but it requires some level of intelligence.
Right. Well, definitely, yeah. So here's another one, and I think that's a biggie in the changes. The Agile Manifesto, not necessarily the Scrum Guide here, has a statement in it: working software over comprehensive documentation. And the Scrum Guide, the new version, actually is now in the section of use of Scrum, distancing itself a little bit from software development purely. So the use of Scrum has been broadened to something, right? And that is a big change. There's a big statement out there now: Scrum for outside of IT.
Well, this is really, really sort of I don't say contentious. I don't know, but so when you talk to Jeff and you talk to Ken, and obviously I'm very fortunate and very lucky to spend a great deal of time talking to them. And what you find is the things that they're very motivated about, the things that they're very focused on, they're very focused on. If you talk to Jeff, he's involved in some huge product development, cars, ships, spaceships, all that sort of stuff. If you talk to Ken, he really is worried about the future of work, the future of society, he calls it the age of accelerations, to quote Thomas Friedman. We're in this world where things are changing continuously, and things that historically have been very stable are no longer stable. Who'd have thought that Amazon would, if they move into pharmaceuticals and distribution of those, what is that going to do to the market? The world is continuously changing. So one thing that's frustrated both of them is that for many people look at Scrum in these contexts, whether it be putting, a man in space or whatever, and say, well, Scrum's just for the software team. And then they surround Scrum with these incredibly complex processes that aren't agile and don't respond to the environment rapidly. Mm-hmm. So that new section, was really added to give credence, to give support for those change agents, those Scrum masters, those people like you, Joe, honestly, mm-hmm. Who are in at the front line, trying to say, well, yeah, I know that it's not product development. We're talking about, I don't know, mm-hmm. missile development or whatever, I don't know. Mm-hmm. But the ideas of inspection and adaptation, the concepts of lean, self-organization, and, the empiricism, the fundamentals of Scrum still hold true. And they honestly are probably one of the few things that we've got working in this world of complexity, in this world of chaos. And so that section was added really in response mm-hmm. response to supporting people like you, honestly.
And thank you. I think this is a very important one for us, and I speak for all of the others who work with Scrum outside of IT as well, right? Because you do look at the Agile Manifesto where the statement is in, right? Working software, there's this piece of software in it. And that's when you look at Agile as a definition. You look at Scrum Guide, or you have looked at the Scrum Guide in previous versions, and there was really no reference to that. And I think this is a big statement where we can actually now have something go to decision makers in organizations such as marketing, HR, and so forth, and tell them, like, look, there is actually stuff in there now. It's broadening, it's happening. So it's really good. This very, very positive signal here, in my opinion. We obviously have to see how it goes, right?
We have to inspect and adapt like anything. But exactly. That's an interesting point. You say go to other parts of the organization. Fundamentally, if you've got a world that's complex, if you've got a situation that is almost chaotic, then Scrum can provide enough stability, enough prescription to allow you to build a process to emerge on top of the framework that you need to respond to that environment. Now, if you're in a marketing organization, that process is going to be very different from a software organization. Now, interestingly, both groups will be using lots of digital technology probably to do their job because, whether you're in marketing or even if you're, digging up carrots, it would mm-hmm. appear that software's everywhere. But ultimately, what emerges is going to be different. Mm-hmm. And that's another important point that people have sort of forgotten, and it was talked about a bit yesterday by I think, Jeff and Ken, is that remember that Scrum is a framework. Now, that is not a methodology. People often call it a methodology, and that would be an incorrect description. Mm-hmm. It's a framework. Process and method will emerge on top of this framework. And it's when it's being practiced by smart people in the context of their problem. And that's a really, really important concept around Scrum because, and then talking about applicability in different contexts, the beauty of Scrum is by keeping it so short, by keeping it the minimal mm-hmm. Of prescription, you can then add to it all the things that you need to do to effectively build a process that responds to your environment. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is that process will never be static.
Right.
And that's the other, which brings us to another change to Scrum Guide, which is around continuous improvement. Now, mm-hmm. I'm going to admit something here about one of these changes. So this change about continuous improvement was added around retrospective and then into planning. Basically, it was the idea that at least one, but not only one, backlog item will be an improvement thing. So basically every time you do a sprint, you're also trying to improve the way you work. Mm-hmm. Now, Ken and Jeff disagreed a bit on this. And this is this interesting, dare I say, healthy tension. Because, Jeff's very Kaizen, mm-hmm. comes from a very strong lean camp. So he believes that if you're not improving, if you're not evolving, you're dead. It's kind of like classic lean thinking. Mm-hmm. Whereas Ken's like, well, every situation is slightly different. Some operational situations don't allow you to always be improving. Sometimes you just have to survive, Mm-hmm. And so But this was a compromise that they managed to agree to really highlight the importance of continuously improving and continuously changing your process in response to the environment. Because cycle times now, the world is changing so rapidly that it's very likely that something that worked once may no longer work. And so the desire to continuously, the highest priority change to happen is very, very, very important. So that's another change. And I think that highlights this methodology and the potential applicability of Scrum in many contexts.
I do agree with you. I think there's the beauty of this changes. There are teams, I have seen teams that have skipped retrospectives altogether. In this case, we have a situation where the team members are actually forced, right, based on the Scrum Guide. There is something written in the Scrum Guide to really think about process improvement, and that process improvement is now going into the sprint in the sprint backlog for the upcoming sprint. So that is really giving the team something to chew on and to think about in terms of process improvement. Now, I think that's incredible positive for me. I love retrospectives. I love if they're done right and everything. But I want to be a devil's advocate. On the other side, we will see people probably starting to take a closer look at this thing and say, like, well, what about the first sprint, right? What is the process improvement item there, right? So you know, like,
oh my God! So were you at that meeting? Because that's exactly the sort of debate that we're like, well, people are idiots, so they're going to take this and incorrectly use it, so this could go horribly wrong. We may end up next year taking it out. But the intent, when Jeff and Ken added this, the intent was very much to put in place something that encouraged the behavior you're talking about. Joe, you're not the only person that sees retro dropped. Well, we haven't got time, or it either gets dropped because you're far too busy and you never get around to doing anything, or it gets dropped because the team doesn't feel empowered to make any changes to the way that they live and the way that they work. Right. And this hopefully will just encourage people to, step up and improve the way that they're working. And because if you can't find something to improve, I'd be very, very surprised.
Right. I think this is the intelligence piece, right? Ken pointed out. It's like you're just gonna go with this and look at it and think about what are the improvement ideas we're having, and just ignore those edge cases. I know there are some teams out there. Their retrospective is about positive outcomes of the retrospective out of the sprint, right? What went well? Let's focus on our strengths. And they might not come out with an actionable item of what can we improve. They might just now we know what we're good at. And so I can see that there is some misinterpretation of that statement. However, I do love the fact that it's actually emphasizing the retrospective, even though it's in the sprint backlog, right? But it's actually emphasizing it closes the loop, in my opinion. I think it's awesome. Yeah. But we are peaking towards the next topic. Like, this is really like a nice setup here in terms of the changes here. We have a nice flow of things, and that is the redefinition of the role of a Scrum Master. I mean, that is huge. Yeah.
Not a mass. It wasn't perhaps as big a change as maybe some of us wanted, but around this sort of like this servant leader that's job in life is to change the world. Again, inspired a bit by Lean and the mechanisms that Lean uses to drive change into organizations, and the Toyota sort of model of leadership, which is very much servant leadership. What's interesting is that, that clarity around the role, the importance of the role. Scrum Masters, you see in many organizations, Scrum Masters being populated by those sort of middle managers, those project managers, etc. And it sort of continues to be that role, and they just manage the team, and the daily Scrum is just a status meeting, and sprint planning is them really telling people what to do whilst working with the product owner, and really that is furthest from the truth. I think that how Ken describes them is he describes them as the person that's responsible for changing the organization to make it valid in spite of itself. It's driving that fundamental shift to agility. They're the people that that you, Joe, spend your life trying to infect and trying to sort of like help, because they have a hard time driving change into an organization. And so this change really was just about updating, increasing the clarity of the role, adding some words around what they do and how they do it, and really just focused on that.
I think, Dave, this is big for me because it does actually also show, I think the clarity is needed because of its widespread adoption of Scrum, right? So it's so popular now, Scrum in the industry, Scrum in all these projects are there in or outside of IT, that the role might have been a little blurry in recent years. I think this really shapes it up again. This is what Scrum is all about, and here's the person, that very unique role in the process. Dave, I have one more question for you towards the end of our podcast, and that is with the new Scrum Guide in the version November 2017. Does that mean we're going to get a Nexus Guide very soon that has some changes based on those changes as an impact?
Yeah, funny you should say that. The Nexus Guide is actually going through a process of revision at the moment. Now, Nexus Guide is owned by Scrum.org in terms of the maintenance of it, with Ken driving it, as opposed to Jeff and Ken. However, it is totally Scrum, as you highlighted. So, yes, in fact, there's a new book coming out December the 15th, 2017, Nexus. You can pre-order it on Amazon if you look up Nexus and Scrum, yes, I am one of the authors, so apologies. Though all money is going to charity, so all the proceeds. But so the combination of that book, that helped us think a lot about the clarity, the changes to the Scrum Guide, and the fact that Nexus is being practiced so many different places at the moment, and we've got a lot of feedback. Yes, there's going to be a new release. It'll probably be end of the year, early next year. It's currently in review. And yes, you expect to see a new version of that guide, and I'm very excited because I think that Nexus ultimately is Scrum. It's an exoskeleton to Scrum. It provides just a little bit of overusing the word clarity at this podcast, and I apologize, but clarity around how you get multiple teams to work together. Is there multiple product owners? Where does Scrum Mastery fit in? How do you get an integrated increment? It provides a lot of guidance there. So I'm excited to see, particularly with the changes we did in the Scrum Guide. I think that adding that and making some changes to that, I think it's a powerful, very powerful combination.
Awesome. I did not know you were working on this, and I will definitely pre-order the book. And and I feel like there is already another podcast in the making about that Nexus book, and having a conversation, and possibly the next version of the Nexus Guide.
Joe, I'll get you one for free, mate. You don't have to order it, okay? It's just special like that.
Thanks, Dave. All right. So this was our conversation about the new Scrum Guide. I think we got them all, right? The major changes.
Yes, I think we covered it all. You are awesome, and you actually you've obviously read it, which is brilliant. I've read it far too many times now, so I'm probably not going to read it for a few months. I'm a little worn out, but yeah, I think we covered all the main topics, Joe. And go to scrumguides.org and download if you want to see a detailed difference. There's obviously that's there as well, and translations are coming in as we speak. It takes a bit of time, but they incrementally they will be coming out. So go and have a look at it. If you've got any questions or comments, at David J. West, yes, or dave.west@scrum.org. Feel free to ping me. I love this, as Joe can attest to. We could talk for hours on the implications of the changes and the future of Scrum, and hopefully if I didn't insult too many people.
Not at all. Dave, thank you so much. Awesome. Talk to you soon. And as you said, go out there and download the latest version and update your teams.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Agile.FM, the radio for the Agile community. I'm your host, Joe Krebs. If you're interested in more programming and additional podcasts, please go to www.agile.fm. Talk to you soon.